action? Has got action, shoot. The picture star is this old boy Chuck Norris who takes on the whole damn town, smokies and all.
He gets back into my town again, you kill him.
John David, don't go! Those people are capable of anything.
Almost did ya.
Please, you've got to help him. They're going to kill him.
10-4, sweet thing. I read you. How about it? We got any 18-wheelers out there with ears on? I'll run with you, wagon master, if somebody out there is going to back us up.
Roger's on that. You can count on me, mud flapper.
Have we got a gun, Lord? A gun.
Hold it! You're all under arrest!
What you say, boys? It's time we waste this town.
Don't muck around with an 18-wheel trucker. He's got a CB radio and 100 friends who just might get mad. Breaker, breaker!
Well, that's a big 10-4. I'm down.
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
I know they're going to kiss me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, doctor, help me.
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that...
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're going to make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first.
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
Breaker 19, welcome to the airwaves, good buddies. We've got a smoking edition of American International Podcast rolling down the highway, and we're breaking it down like a double nickel on the asphalt. So grab your gear shift and strap in for a wild ride as we kick the tires and talk all things Breaker Breaker, starring the one and only Chuck Norris. This is Jeff Markin coming at you. What's your handle?
Cheryl Lightfoot.
That's a big 10-4.
Oh my God. So that's impossible to top. So I'm just going to push on. Breaker Breaker from 1977 was directed by Don Hulette, written by Terry Chambers, produced by Sam Schulman, Bernard Tabakin, Don Hulette, and John Burrows for Paragon Films, Worldwide Productions.
And Breaker Breaker stars Chuck Norris as John David J.D. Dawes, George Murdock as Judge Joshua Trimmings, Terry O'Connor as Arlene Trimmings, Don Gentry as Sheriff Strode, John DiFusco as Arney, Ron Cedillos as Deputy Boles, Michael Augenstein as Billy Dawes, Dan Vandegrift as Wilfred, Douglas Stevenson as Drake.
It also stars Paul Kawecki as Wade, Larry Fetter as George, Jack Nance as Burton, David Bezar as Tony Trimmings, Miranda Garrrison as the Barmaid, Amelia Laurenson as Luana, Deborah Shore as Pearl, the great John L. as Kaminsky, and David Stephen Essex as Elroy.
Not to take away from the great John L., but I want to say that he's actually credited as the great John L. He was a wrestler, and that's not necessarily our opinion of him.
Yes, it is.
So the film opens up with the sounds of people singing Bringing in the Sheaves.
Yep, a town meeting is happening in the square, and there's a throng of people listening to a town leader who tells them all that the state of California has granted their little podunk bird a city charter for once.
Yeah, there's a character on a delivery tricycle, and he brings in the plaque to give to the person holding this meeting, and he holds it up and christens the city Texas City, California.
This is Judge Trimmings. We'll meet him officially later, but he says that the town is being named after his absent or dead son, Tex.
And then we go to credits.
The credits roll over footage of Chuck Norris as Trucker J.D. Dawes, and he is rolling on home.
The theme song, such as it is, consists of a bunch of CB banter.
J.D. gets on the radio, asks some of the other truckers if they know where his brother Billy is. And he finds out that he's out racing his dirt bike.
Yeah, someone tells him he's out at the dirt bike track. So JD heads over there, and he arrives just in time to watch Billy's bike take off without him.
It's really dusty there. We see Billy, the brother, take a spill. He whips off his helmet, and then he sees his big brother standing there. And then he asks JD if he'd like to run a few laps.
So JD is going to sit and watch. He pulls up a lawn chair. I guess he keeps it in his truck.
Why not?
And lounges around watching Billy not ride his dirt bike so well.
No, it's very dirty and dusty. It's not really a great place to sit, but he does get a good view of the action, if there were any anyways.
Billy rides over to greet JD, and they embrace, a brotherly embrace.
That involves a lot of wrestling.
And Billy says, welcome home. So apparently JD's trucking has taken him away for a while.
I don't know if it's in the text, but I read that he was coming back from Alaska. I think that gets mentioned a little bit later. So he has been gone for as long as it takes to drive back from Alaska.
So their embrace turns into a chase. They run up a hill and wrestle around the ground, and as brothers do.
I guess I only have one. We never did that.
So next we see JD is at a truck stop. He sees an acquaintance and says, hi, Dottie, but she's not in the best of spirits.
No, Dottie has some bad news. She goes to her rig, opens the door where we see her husband. He's got a neck brace on and he's sitting there very still. Dottie tells JD that her husband Jack got into some trouble. He met up with a man named Strode, and now Jack is paralyzed, half his body.
Dottie says she never thought she'd let a man see her cry, but JD says it's okay, he won't tell anyone.
Well, there's no time to worry about that because Billy is getting behind the wheel of a truck for the first time, doing his first run.
I guess he's some kind of trucking apprentice. He's in the cab of the truck, and JD climbs up to give him some advice. He warns him to watch out for the guys at Shelley Foods. He says that Billy will need to weigh the load before leaving to be sure that they haven't overloaded the truck, because they have a tendency to do that, I guess.
And that's bad for truckers, or you can't be over a certain weight on the road. Billy wants to know what the cargo is that he'll be carrying, and JD says TV dinners, and then Billy makes a face and goes, yuck.
I did too.
But they know the slogan for Shelley Foods, and that is, if it's from Shelley, it's good for your belly. They both repeat that.
So Billy takes off on his first solo run. He's talking on his CB, and Billy mentions that he's probably overweight and would like to avoid the scales.
So he didn't listen to JD, but here I wanted to point out that JD didn't give him the warning about what happened to Dottie and her husband in Texas City. So Billy is riding off not knowing anything about that.
Well, maybe at this point it's just a one-time thing and nobody's concerned. But we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, we'll find out that's not true. So Billy's on the road and all is well until he starts getting messages from someone he thinks is a fellow trucker. That person warns him to get off the main highway so he doesn't get weighed and fined, of course.
Billy is much obliged and takes the alternate route. And then we see that the person on the other end of the call is not a trucker at all. It's someone wearing a badge.
It's a bad cop.
Diesel dirt biker, southbound on 99. Any other 18-wheelers out there coming north?
You got the Red Dog coming back.
Thanks for the comeback, Red Dog. How the chicken coops look down there?
Not too good. State bear setting up portable scales.
Mercy, I think I'm overweight.
You can take the 120 down to 5. Probably get a clean run.
Thank you much, Red Dog. I'm moving.
And poor good buddy.
Billy reroutes. He exits from the main highway. Meanwhile, over at the restaurant, which is called Restaurant, JD is having coffee with one of his trucker friends, who tells him how hauling a load of pigs ruined his sense of smell.
This friend, we would find out, is named Burton. And interestingly enough, the actor is a regular in David Lynch films.
We were looking him up, and I saw a picture of Eraserhead, the poster for the movie. And it turns out he is the main character in Eraserhead. I was shocked and delighted to find that out.
Which came out the same year as Breaker Breaker.
Right. He looks radically different in this movie, though.
So JD asks Burton if he knows anything about a guy named Strode, and Burton says he saw Jack.
Burton knows all about it. He says that Strode is the law of the former bauxite mine ghost town, now officially called Texas City, California. He tells JD that there's really a lot of corruption in that town.
Yep, he says that you can't run a box lunch through that town without giving everybody a bite.
They're interrupted by Pearl, the waitress, who comes to the table. She starts bantering with JD, asking what a well-refined and educated man like him is doing with this kind of riffraff, meaning Burton, of course. JD jokes that he's writing an article about the lowlifes on Route 99.
Then another fella comes up. This is Elroy, and he says that somebody wants to challenge JD to a match. JD is the reigning champion. JD says not today. He just got into town, but Elroy says that he already bet $10. This new party couldn't beat JD.
And Elroy says that the other contestant in question claims that he can put JD down in 10 seconds. And now we see the challengers. And boy, is this an interesting group.
Yeah, they enter the room. The first guy looks like the strong man in a circus. He's bald. He's got the curly mustache.
He's wearing a black mesh wife beater.
And the fellow behind him is wearing a pirate hat.
Is he a pirate? We don't know.
Next in line is a guy in a leather cap, a little more inconspicuous. And even more so is the fourth guy.
With a leather cowboy hat on?
The short guy with the beard and those sleeves.
Oh, right, yeah. At any rate, they look like the understudies for the village people.
The strongman sits down and introduces himself as Kaminsky.
Very politely, I might add. But as JD shakes his hand, he kind of winces a bit. Maybe it's a extra strong grip there. Kaminsky declares that he's going to put JD down, but JD says that he's not going to wrestle him. He doesn't want to take Kaminsky's money.
Then Kaminsky threatens JD and says he's going to tear his head off if he doesn't fight.
JD doesn't want his head torn off, so he asks if maybe he could finish his lunch first. Kaminsky cordially invites JD to meet him in the pool room when he's finished his dinner.
So as this group leaves, Burton says to JD that they call him the Polish Angel, and did you see the arms on him?
Apparently, angels, Polish or otherwise, are known for their muscular arms.
And meanwhile, Billy's in his rig and he's keeping on trucking. He's listening to the radio and decides he's had enough of the evangelical program he'd been listening to, so he's going to change the station, which momentarily distracts him.
It distracts him so much that he very nearly runs into a sheriff's deputy who pulls in front of him abruptly. This is Deputy Boles, who tells Billy that there's a big accident up ahead and he needs to detour away from that. He points him up a narrow dirt road. Billy's not sure that his truck is going to make it, but Deputy Boles assures him that he will.
So Billy takes off to the sound of banjo music on the soundtrack.
Oh, that's never good. Eventually he reaches a town, which by the city sign, we know that it's Texas City, known as the friendliest town in the West.
As he passes the sign, another man in uniform sees him pulling into town. We recognize him as the one who took Billy off the main road to avoid the scales.
And this cop puts his lights on and pulls Billy over.
Back at the truck stop, money is exchanging hands in anticipation of the arm wrestling match between Kaminsky and JD.
Meanwhile, Pearl, the waitress, and one of her fellow employees are dealing with the lunch crowd. Pearl advises her friend to give the truckers sad eyes to shame them into tipping her properly. Then, a patron named Earl starts calling out for more coffee. Pearl sasses back, "Sit on it, Earl. How many cups of coffee you want for your quarter?" Pearl advises her friend that truckers only care about how fast their trucks will go, how far their CBs will reach, and my ass and your ass. The other waitress gets her butt pinched as she passes by a table on her way to refill Earl's coffee cup.
So in Texas City, Billy finds himself sitting in the sheriff's office for whatever it is he's allegedly done. He sees that his rig is being driven off, and he wants to know why.
Strode says that the rig is being impounded so it doesn't get hijacked. He can't just leave it by the side of the road. Billy wants to make sure that someone turns the cooler on because his load is perishable. Strode replies that he doesn't want Billy to tell him what to do. And then we see our main villain of the movie. Judge Trimmings stumbles drunkenly across the town square, walks into his makeshift courthouse, where he puts on a bright red robe and climbs up to his bench.
Yeah, this is Billy's arraignment. He's being charged with speeding, failure to post shipper's name in the proper place, failure to keep a log of his travels, driving an overweight rig, and resisting arrest. How does he plead? Well, Billy is indignant. He says this is all a pack of lies.
These charges have been made up, and Billy realizes only too late that he's been railroaded into this town. It's a trap to make money for the town. Judge Trimmings barks at him to answer the charges, but Billy's still protesting.
He says he couldn't have been speeding because it wasn't even possible with the roads the way they were.
But Judge Trimmings isn't listening to him. He's actually listening to a fly that's buzzing around him. Boles just swats it with a handy fly swatter.
Now back at the truck stop, Kaminsky and JD are finally arm wrestling.
Yes, they're hand in hand.
JD easily wins, but Kaminsky calls interference, saying someone pushed him, and that JD was trying to hypnotize him, and they have to go again. Then he punches JD in the face.
This starts a brawl. Pearl is standing at the ready with a cafeteria tray, should that be required, but it's not yet.
Everybody's paired off and fighting somebody. Kaminsky comes at JD, but a couple of quick kicks to the face easily take him out.
This is a motif that will be repeated often in this movie. JD goes up to Elroy and chastises him for getting him mixed up in this again. Then he asks Burton for a ride because Billy took his truck. And Pearl finally gets a chance to use her tray. She whacks the guy with the cowboy hat on the head, knocking him out.
So now we're back in Texas City Kangaroo Court. Billy is complaining that this isn't a town, it's a racket.
Testify, Billy. Judge Trimmings tells Billy that this is a community of fine, hardworking folk, something outsiders like Billy would never understand. He claims that this town has numerous industries and enterprises that, unfortunately, Judge Trimmings doesn't have the time to show Billy. Billy laughs derisively at this, and Judge Trimmings takes this as an insult to the court and to the law.
And thus immediately finds him guilty of everything he's charged with. He's sentenced to pay $250 or 250 days.
Now, a reasonable person would just pay the fine and get the heck out of this town. Maybe leave a bad Yelp review for it or something. But Billy is not a reasonable person.
No, he shouts out, "You won't get away with this." And while Judge Trimmings keeps calling for order, Billy continues. He grabs a hold of Sheriff Strode's club and beats Deputy Boles with it. Then he escapes by jumping through a glass window.
That's never a good idea, folks. You get cut up in the worst way. He starts to try and run. He goes up to various townspeople, but they aren't going to help him. He makes it as far as a rickety stable where he falls down, leading to an easy capture.
He poses on the ground seductively as Strode and Boles approach him.
There is a lot of subtext in this movie. But now it's time for a short break. Chuck Norris is teaching us all about finding our third eye.
He's doing some yoga, tai chi, meditation thing.
Meditation is essential to the martial arts training. It is imperative that you develop yourself not only physically, but mentally and spiritually as well. To meditate, you must concentrate on what we call the third eye, the center, beginning right here. Close your eyes. As you're focusing, you'll notice that it will become brighter and brighter. Your total concentration is on the third eye.
He's interrupted when the phone rings. It's Burton on the other line.
Yep, I guess his third ear heard that.
Burton's reporting that he's checked with the highway patrol and there hasn't been any accidents. JD says he checked with the scale master and Billy never even turned up. JD deduces that Billy must have taken a side road to Highway 5.
This signals the alarms for Burton because that's Texas City, and they have their own kind of law there. They work the side roads.
Strode works the front and Boles works the back.
Except for it kind of worked the other way around for Billy. Burton cautions JD to take care if he goes up there, but JD says that he'll be careful.
So next thing we know, JD is in his van and out looking for Billy.
It's a conversion van, customized with a airbrush painting of an eagle on the side. It's a real shaggin' wagon.
And truthfully, Chuck Norris looks much more comfortable in this van than he ever looked in a truck.
He heads towards Texas City and runs into trouble immediately. 2 yokels are shooting at him from top of a hill, and JD has to turn around and go back the other way. After they've chased him away, the yokels go home to their yard to celebrate with the rest of their family. Then we go back into Texas City proper. We're outside a building which is labeled Justice Court. A woman is flapping her husband around for giving in and paying the fine because they got pulled over too. Deputy Boles comes out and she starts in on him, kind of smacking him with her purse. When Boles gets outraged, the woman hides behind her husband, who then has to take her beating on his own. Boles beats the husband down to the ground and walks away pleased with his work.
JD pulls into a quote-unquote garage.
It's the only one in town.
As his van is smoking, apparently it took a hit when the yokels were shooting, and JD is in need of a new radiator.
There's only one person at the station now, and this is Arney. And we see that he's mentally challenged.
We did see Arney earlier in the first scene. He was the one who delivered the plaque to Judge Trimmings that announced the town had been awarded its charter. Right now, he's beating a tire with a sledgehammer, trying to get the rim off.
But he does know enough to say that JD can find his radiator, not a new one, but a replacement radiator, at the scrapyard. Arney says that his brother is the mechanic and he'll be back soon if JD needs help. JD asks for directions to the police department and Arney points him in the right direction. But as he leaves, he sees Arney struggling with the tire, so he helps him. He flips it over and shows him how to pry the rim off with a proper tool, not a sledgehammer.
While this is happening, someone steps out from the building and is watching from a distance.
This is Arney's brother, Wade, who's the actual mechanic. Wade comes up to Arney and asks what the stranger wanted and warns Arney not to let anybody see those tires. I think that they were stolen.
Well, they probably came off Billy's truck.
Well, they came off somebody's truck, I'm sure.
So JD is walking through town.
Bold as brass.
The buildings all look like facades.
Yeah, this is a ghost town for a haunted park or something. This isn't a real city.
JD goes into the sheriff's office where an older man, I assume this is jailkeeper in the credits, is sweeping the floor. He says that Sheriff Strode and Deputy Boles are out on patrol, and JD asks who's in charge when they're out. And the man tells him that Judge Trimmings is in charge even when they're in. JD
asks him where you can find Judge Trimmings, and he's directed to the bar across the street. We go across the street where Judge Trimmings is flirting with the barmaid. He's wearing a hand puppet on his hand. There's rolls of creepy dolls looking on everywhere.
Yeah, this bar has very unusual decor.
So he's flirting, not really paying attention. JD walks in, trying to talk to him. JD wants to lodge a complaint. The judge says something in Latin, Anno Domini, and then begins to philosophize on the nature of complaints.
I want to lodge a complaint.
A complaint. A complaint. Enos Domini. The greatest complaint of all. It is the usual fortune of complaint to excite contempt more than pity.
Am I wasting my time?
Time, the tooth that gnaws away at everything, but is powerless in the face of truth.
So JD leaves. He's got to go find a radiator anyway.
And Judge Trimmings begins quoting the balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet at the fair Barmaid. But soon his curiosity gets the better of him, and he takes off. He wants to find out more about this mysterious blonde stranger.
JD goes over to the scrapyard, where he finds a radiator waiting for him. George, the scrap connoisseur, knew he was coming.
He's also gouging JD for the price of the radiator. He's basically having to pay new radiator prices for a rebuilt part.
$64.02.
That's a lot of money in 1977.
But which JD is able to pay in cash.
JD tells George to run the part over to the service station. George starts to protest, but JD stops him by asking him a question.
JD asks George if he's seen a blue and white rig. George says, "Why, you lose one?" JD turns to leave. George says, "Hey, don't forget your radiator." JD says, "At that price, deliver it."
So JD has won that round. Over at the service station, Arney's brother Wade is sharing JD's registration with Boles and Strode. They realize that he's Billy's brother. They have the same last name and the same address. And JD had gotten around their speed trap by coming in through the canyon, not the main road.
Now, Arney is riding around in his little delivery cart. He's brought JD his radiator, and Arney tells JD that his brother, Wade, can fix it for him. He can fix anything.
JD says that he has a brother too, but he's lost. And this confuses Arney because his brother Wade tells him to get lost a lot.
JD asks Arney if he knows where his brother is, but the shopkeeper from earlier, who wasn't helpful to Billy when he was fleeing the courthouse, yells out to Arney to tend to business. So Arney says he's got to tend to business.
We're back at the bar now, where Judge Trimmings is trying to teach the barmaid to play chess. Strode comes in to report that JD has the same last name and address as that kid they did something to. Judge Trimmings tells Strode to get him. Strode wants to know on what charge, and Judge Trimmings says, willfully avoiding a speed trap.
That's $36.70. And they all share a laugh at this.
It's pretty funny.
So JD now enters the local diner. The waitress is Arlene Trimmings, and she's the judge's daughter-in-law, but we don't know this yet.
She's also related to a fair few of the other, if not all, of the rest of the residents of the town.
Arlene serves JD a coffee.
She gives him a menu too, but the cook comes from the kitchen to replace it with the right menu, with higher prices for out-of-towners. JD wonders if this too is a Trimmings enterprise, and he orders a donut. And then he asks if he can have cream for his coffee, or does that cost extra? And Arlene laughs like this is the funniest thing she's ever heard.
And she laughs almost hysterically, saying that's one that he hadn't hit on yet. The cook looks out from his hole and says, "Don't step out of line, Arlene."
Arlene looks pretty downtrodden at this. JD asks to use the phone. Arlene says he can and points him in that direction. But again, the cook yells that it's out of order. JD says that this whole town is out of order, and he pays for his meager meal and leaves. But guess who's out there waiting?
It's Strode and Boles. They're standing in the street. Strode says, "Hey, boy, come here." And JD walks up to them, puts his hands on his hips, and Strode punches him in the gut.
Strode promises to kick his butt all the way back to Highway 99. And then he commands Boles to show him. But this is Chuck Norris, so of course, JD takes him out with a couple of kicks. And then JD runs away. Over in another part of town, Wade's trigger-happy cousins, who shot at JD on his way into town, are complaining about Arney rather insultingly. Wade hears this and tells them to never do that again. And they're referring to his mental state.
So now JD is walking along the road somewhere. Arlene drives up with her son, Tony, and she tells JD that if he still needs a phone, he can use hers.
He calls Burton, and Burton says that he hasn't heard anything. And JD tells Burton that there's more wrong with Texas City than just a speed trap. Burton says that the CB is buzzing up and down the coast, and every trucker in California is out looking for Billy.
Burton asks what the sheriff had to say, but JD confesses he hasn't really talked to him yet, but he does say that there is something strange going on in Texas City.
Arlene's in the kitchen telling her son to eat his meal. JD says, "No, thank you, I'm not hungry." He thought she meant him. He's lost in thought. Arlene says that they don't have any ties there, so they can talk honestly. And then there's a really weird musical interlude.
Yeah, there's a montage where JD and Arlene walk around in a field, and she's yapping and yapping and talking and talking.
We wouldn't be able to know what she said if it weren't for the closed captioning because the music is very loud.
It's a song called I've Heard These Words, and I'd probably rather listen to that than Arlene talk anyway.
At the end of this musical number, JD asks what happened to Billy. Arlene has no clue.
So in town, there seems to be a town meeting in the courthouse, and the townspeople are going over the ill-gotten gains they've acquired in the last month.
Yeah, Judge Trimmings, our Southern Fried Kelsey Grammer, is presiding over the meeting. In florid, almost poetic language, he's telling the assembled townsfolk that if they have any questions, they're to go to him. And then he calls on George, the guy from the scrapyard, to address the crowd. George tells the townspeople about the last bunch of vehicles they acquired, put that in air quotes, and George says they'll have 20 tons by the end of the month. 20 tons of what exactly? We don't know. Then Judge Trimmings calls on Wilfred, who's the town's distiller, who says that they are making 50 gallons of moonshine a day, and they're not having any trouble with the revenuers.
And this is when JD bursts into the room. He walks right up to the bench, and the judge addresses him, saying, I don't know what you've heard, but whatever it is, there's a whole room of people who are all going to deny it.
JD only wants to know where Billy is. He doesn't care about their racket. Judge Trimmings plays dumb and says, Brother, what brother? JD says he's not going anywhere without his brother.
A group of men stand and surround JD, so JD takes a moment to put on his black fighting gloves.
George Trimmings tells the group that where force is necessary, it will be applied boldly, decisively, and completely.
One of the men cocks a gun, and JD says, You're right, Judge. And a fight ensues.
The butt-kicking commences.
It doesn't last long.
No, Judge Trimmings yells at the townsfolk to get him, but they don't.
JD ducks out the door. He swings himself up to the rafters in the awning outside the courthouse as the men after him file out.
And run away. They all run off.
Run off looking for him.
But they don't stay because I guess once you're on the roof, you're gone. But Judge Trimmings is the only one left behind. JD drops down onto the deck outside the building, and Judge Trimmings is surprised to see him.
He's impressed and commends JD on his ingenuity. And then he calls for Strode.
While the judge is yelling, JD merely walks away. Strode doesn't come, but the other townsmen do.
Everywhere JD goes, townsfolk are coming after him.
One at a time, of course.
One guy has a pitchfork and says, I'm going to stick ya. He is quickly disarmed and disposed of.
He takes out a few townspeople, 1, 2, 3. The fourth one comes up, thinks better of attacking JD, and runs away. Then JD rounds a corner where that same guy who ran away is running down a stairway. He takes that guy out. The next guy is disabled by a punch to the crotch. And now JD's pursued by everyone, including the police. He makes it to his van, which is apparently now repaired. Arney gives him his keys so he can drive off, because otherwise he'd be stuck there.
And now this foot chase becomes a car chase. JD and his van leads Strode and Boles in their cars up a hill. JD makes it easily. The cop cars have a little more difficulty.
This chase is kicking up a lot of dust, and JD's in the front, so it's not really messing with his visibility, but the cops are having trouble following him.
So having eluded the police, such as they are, JD goes to see the only ally he has in Texas City. He goes to Arlene's.
Arlene tells him that she heard there's a madman loose in town, and she also tells him that he better hide his van out back. They'll see it from the road.
So Strode and Boles go back to the judge's home to report on their failure.
Judge Trimmings is cuddling his cat like a Bond villain, and he's reading Strode the Riot Act. He can't understand why an unarmed man caused so much trouble.
Strode says it wasn't really their fault. Arney gave the keys back to JD.
Judge Trimmings doesn't want to hear any excuses. They bicker for a little bit. Then the judge's wife comes in and tells him to let his men go home.
She says it's time for bed and leaves, inviting the judge to join her. Before heading up to bed himself, Judge tells the men that if Dawes shows up in his town again, kill him. And then the cat meows.
Now it's nighttime, and we are with JD and Arlene there curled up in the back of his van. Then what I believe is a dream happens. JD sees Billy running away from Strode. It's daytime. He's running up a hill. Billy gets to the top of the hill, and Strode shoots him in the back.
JD wakes up with a yell.
Billy! And Arlene cradles him to her bosom for comfort. So the next day, we see Wilfred, the moonshine guy. He's gassing up his chopper. He's going to do some surveillance.
The next morning, it's breakfast time at Arlene's house. Tony asks his mother if she and JD are going to get married since she slept in his van last night. But Arlene says that they were just talking.
Arlene says they weren't sleeping, which was probably true for part of the time. Now Wilfred's up in the air. He's calling down to the cops, Boles. He found the van, and it's at Boles' cousin's house, and that's Arlene.
Looks like she's found herself a boyfriend, he says.
And Boles says the judge won't like that.
So I don't know how much time has passed, but apparently breakfast is over and maybe it's lunchtime because JD and Tony Arlene are enjoying some of Shelley's frozen dinners. Arlene and Tony repeat the slogan that Billy and JD had recited earlier. If it's from Shelley, it's good for your belly. And this triggers something in JD.
JD asks where they got those TV dinners. And Tony says that his uncle Arney brought over a bunch of them. This triggers something in JD. He's found a clue. Those TV dinners could only have come from Billy's rig. And he knows there's only one place in town where his truck could be hidden. He starts to run off, ignoring Arlene's advice to not do that. She says these people are capable of anything.
Arlene asks him not to go, but he tells her to get her things together and he'll be back for her and Tony later.
And now we're at the scrapyard, where Arney is having fun crushing up cars.
Wilfred is flying overhead. Arney waves hello, and Wilfred shouts down that Dawes is in the yard.
Yeah, he sneaked in.
So George grabs a sledgehammer and goes Dawes hunting.
Wilfred's trying to clue George into JD's location, but even though George eventually finds JD, JD gets the better of him in a fight. Then he asks George where Billy is, and George looks over at the car crusher, sort of pointedly, where a new vehicle is now being smashed. JD looks over there several beats later, and then he concludes that, oh yeah, Billy's in there, being crushed. He turns away from George and starts crying against a car.
George grabs a quarter panel and knocks JD out. He drags JD over to the car crusher and throws him in there. And then George tells Arney to turn it on, but Arney doesn't want to do that. It's dangerous to activate it when there's a person in the car being crushed. So George starts it himself as Arney runs away. Wilfred is still flying around watching from above.
However, this car crusher is moving so slowly that JD's not in imminent danger. He attempts to crawl out of the machine, but George sees him and grabs a tire iron to beat him back into it. JD takes the hit, but he lashes out at George, kicking him in the chest. George falls to the ground, and JD manages to extract himself from the crusher.
Just in time.
Just in time. I think he had a few minutes to spare.
JD checks on the unconscious George, takes off his black gloves. Apparently, this was a lethal blow and George is dead.
We'll have to take everyone's word for it, though, because nobody ever takes him to the medical examiner or anything.
And Wilfred radios.
Yeah, Wilfred sees all from his copter.
Wilfred sees this from his copter and radios the news to Strode.
However, Strode is with Boles and the judge in Arlene's house. The judge is drunk as a skunk. He's forcing Tony to sit on his lap and to report on his mom and JD's nocturnal activities.
Tony's also wearing the judge's hat.
Well, it's his grandpa.
The judge is amused that JD slept in the van last night, and he asked if Tony slept in the van too, and more importantly, did his mother.
Arlene protests she doesn't want her house turned into a courtroom, and then they bicker about whose house it is really. Arlene says that Howard, which is the judge's son, he called him Tex at the beginning of the movie, that Howard put every dollar he had into the place, but Judge Trimmings says that he loaned Howard the money.
And he's got the papers to prove it.
He grows more and more menacing as the argument ramps up, which means that he's holding Tony more and more violently. Arlene says that Howard didn't love his father, and that his father destroyed Howard because he couldn't corrupt him.
The judge ignores this and asks Tony again if his mother slept in the van. Arlene has had enough at this point and tries to throw everyone out. Strode grabs Tony, and the judge says that he'll be taking care of his grandson now. He tells Strode to bring Tony to his house and tells Tony that he'll be moving in with him and his wife, Luana.
Tony's not thrilled with this plan. He bites Strode on the hand, and that allows him to fall to the ground and run away.
So at the neighborhood watering hole,
the baby doll bar,
the barmaid is mending one of her dolls when JD barges in. He asks where Judge Trimmings is, and she says that's none of his business.
JD grabs the phone, trying to make a call, but Wade comes in, shotgun at the ready. The barmaid says, "Daddy's home," and Wade has captured JD.
Elsewhere, we see that Tony is making a run for it, and Strode is chasing behind him.
Wade is walking JD to the jail. A crowd gathers on the way.
Arney looks out the window to see that JD is being brought into the courthouse by men with shotguns and rakes.
Arney asks, what did JD do? And a woman outside the window says that JD killed his cousin George. Wilfred is still trying to call Strode on the radio. Boles notices that there's a call for him. Strode has gotten back to his car, but without Tony. Strode comes back to Arlene's house, and Wilfred reports that JD is in the jail. Judge Trimmings asks where his grandson is. Strode says that he got away. Arlene looks pretty triumphant until she hears that JD is in jail.
The judge tells Boles to stay and watch Arlene while he and Strode go to pay a visit to JD in jail.
He rips out her phone, and says that Boles needs to watch her in case she has any heroic notions. Strode gets in the car to drive the judge in. Arlene frantically beats on the car, but they drive away.
In town, Arney is understandably upset about the death of his cousin George, and he feels he'd better get lost.
The judge arrives at the jail cell. He asks J.D. if he killed the Trimmings.
J.D. sits silently. The judge says he has looked over the facts of the case and has rendered a verdict of guilty of murder. The sentence is death, and he exits.
And J.D. just sits there impassively taking it. Boles is not a very good babysitter because Arlene has gotten around to the back of the house, into the garage where she has found a dirt bike, strapped on a helmet, and she races off. Boles finally sees her, though, and pursues her.
Arney, in his grieving, goes to the barn to make out with a stuffed lion. This upsets the horse to no end.
There's an agitated horse in the stable. Arney looks in and sees that there are hands tied by a rope and a rat crawling over them, and he runs away, unable to cope with this sight.
Arlene is still riding off somewhere on her dirt bike, but her bike throws her. She goes over to pick it up, but she hears a radio in the distance. She runs toward a hill and looks down and sees a police car sitting there.
It's abandoned. It's been there a while, too. She slides down the hill and gets on the radio. She issues a general call-out. She's in Texas City, where a trucker named J.D. Dawes is about to get murdered. He's in the jail, and they're going to kill him. Can anyone help?
This is the kind of news truckers love to hear. So we see a montage of truckers calling each other, getting pumped about their new mission.
Hello, somebody out there? This is Arlene Trimmings in Texas City. They've got a trucker by the name of J.D. Dawes in jail. Please, you've got to help him. They're going to kill him.
10-4, sweet thing. I read you. How about it? We got any 18-wheelers out there with ears on? I'll run with you, wagon master, if somebody out there is going to back us up.
Now, how about any of you gear jammers out there want to kick some ass and take names later?
Arlene is visibly relieved, and even more so when creepy little Tony pops up from the back seat behind her.
His arms come from the back, and he reaches up and covers her eyes. But mother and son are reunited, so I guess all is well.
And all is well because the truckers are on their way.
Some of the townsfolk in Texas City are sitting around trying to figure out what all that noise is. Is it thunder?
Nope, it's 4 or 5 semi-trucks racing toward them.
Wilfred is still flying around in his helicopter, and he reports that trucks are headed to Texas City. So Strode sets up a roadblock.
Wilfred serves as the eye in the sky, reporting on the whole mess of trucks headed their way. Strode is sitting up at his impromptu roadblock, but the truckers barrel right through it, telling him to take a 10-100. That's a bathroom break for all you non-CB folks.
As the semis barrel through, they send a blue pickup truck rolling down a hill, which results in a gratifying explosion.
They sent Strode down the hill too, and we never see him again. Now the truckers are in town where they go into maximum overdrive, making the rickety clapboard town shimmy and shake.
Wade feels, for some reason, that this would be a good time to let J.D. out of his cell, so he takes him at gunpoint outside.
One of the truckers reports that J.D. ain't in jail no more, so they'll have to tear the whole town down.
Wade has J.D. backed up against a wagon, his gun pointed at him. Arney comes running up to tell Wade about the trucks tearing through town, and Wade tells Arney to get out of there. And then Arney notices that he's about to shoot J.D., and he doesn't want his brother to become a murderer, so Arney says, "You can't," and he tries to grab the gun.
The gun goes off and hits J.D. in the side. Wade and Arney are still struggling, and the gun goes off one more time. This time, it's a fatal wound for Arney.
Arney tells Wade he's mad at him, and it's getting dark. And then he dies.
This is actually a really sad scene. A guilt-ridden Wade tells J.D. that his brother is in the barn.
The truckers are still rolling through town. People are fleeing, jumping out of the way. And Boles goes into the barn. He goes to the stall where Billy is tied up, and he teases him a little bit with a gun and a knife. He cuts the ropes and tells him to get up and go.
But then he starts kicking Billy. But no worry, J.D. is here. He rushes at Boles, kicking him through the stable wall. And then he and Billy have their touchy-feely family reunion. Boles watches as J.D. and Billy embrace. J.D. looks up and sees him and goes after Boles.
The truckers aren't merely satisfied to drive through town. Now they're going to drive through the buildings. People continue to duck out of the way.
One of them drives through the service station and starts a conflagration. Now we're with Boles and J.D. Boles tries to stab J.D. with a hay hook, and they wrestle. Boles runs off. J.D. realizes that his wound is slowing him down. So he looks within himself, using his third eye, willing the pain away. In another part of town, a trucker plows straight through Wilfred's chopper, setting it ablaze. And then another trucker drives into the judge's house.
He had just climbed into bed with his wife, Luana, and she asks what was that sound. The judge looks up to listen as the truck bursts through the wall, presumably killing them both.
But we don't know.
Because we never see them again.
And now it's time for the final showdown.
Boles is sitting on a fence with a bottle of wild turkey.
It's a horse enclosure. There's a sweaty black stallion running around seductively. Sort of a spaghetti western stare down happening between JD and Boles.
JD comes up and throws off one of the top rails of the fence, and Boles offers him a drink. JD doesn't accept the drink. He walks over toward where Boles is sitting, and Boles comes down. The horse is running around anxiously at these people confronting each other in his pen.
Boles smashes his bottle against the railing of the fence and comes at JD with the broken top of it. But JD roundhouse kicks it away in slow-mo.
So during this fight, punches are thrown, kicks are lodged, sand is thrown.
JD easily dodges that. Boles gets hit and in slow motion yells, "Yeah!"
Since he's down, Dawes starts to walk away, but Boles yells out, "Dawes, you son of a bitch," also in slow motion.
But JD does not like to be called names. He does a running kick that hits Boles square in the chest and that knocks him down. He's probably dead. And then the horse, in approval, jumps over the fence. But we get a freeze frame of the horse in midair, suspended over the fence. And we get one last shot of the town. It's completely engulfed in flames.
The words of Judge Trimmings echo out about what a great day this is. The state of California has granted their town a charter. And we fade to black.
And then credits roll as the truckers all congratulate themselves in CB lingo. It's not necessarily transparent to me, a non-trucker, but it sounds like they're all headed home to drink Coors and maybe do some drugs. Who can tell? But we do know that it's over.
You're listening to the American International Podcast, where we've been discussing Breaker Breaker from 1977.
The production budget for Breaker Breaker was $250,000, $100,000 of which came from Samuel Z. Arkoff. The movie was shot on the Paramount Ranch in Agoura, California.
The film's title, Breaker Breaker, refers to a CB term in which a driver is requesting a break into a conversation. It's usually followed by a numbered code indicating the channel the user wants to break in on. In the late 1970s, the U.S. experienced a fascination with semi-truck drivers and CB radios, which most truckers had in their rigs. CB radios were mass-produced and successfully marketed and sold to the general public.
Believe it or not, this is the first leading role for Chuck Norris. He said he was paid $5,000 to do the film. He's quoted as saying, "I didn't know anything when I made that movie. We shot it in just 11 days. But it was amazing. People loved it anyways." He went on to say, "I want to become as big in the movie industry as I've been in the karate industry." He said in 1977, continuing, "I know I can do it because I have the faith to do it."
A promo for Breaker Breaker was shot prior to the main feature to persuade producers to finance the production.
And speaking of that, in his autobiography, Flying Through Hollywood by the Seat of My Pants, Sam Arkoff said that in 1977, AIP used Chuck Norris, a karate expert turned actor, to help exploit another popular trend, citizen band radios. Arkoff said that he was approached by Hulette, then a young producer-director, for money to finish Breaker Breaker. He'd already shot some of it, probably made that promo too. And when Arkoff viewed it, he considered it interesting but not earth-shaking. However, he liked the hook of having Norris's character rescued by other truckers who received his cry for help via CB radio, and gave the filmmaker $100,000 to complete the movie, as we said earlier.
Arkoff claims that at the time, he was unaware of Norris's stature as an international karate champion. He was only interested in exploiting the CB radio trend. And Arkoff wasn't alone in this. Arkoff wrote that Freddie Fields, the producer of Looking for Mr. Goodbar and American Gigolo, was producing his own film on the same subject, albeit with a bigger budget and a better-known cast, and Fields asked Arkoff to delay the release of Breaker Breaker.
He proposed this because he thought his picture would do better, and that would create a market for Arkoff's CB picture. Arkoff didn't buy that line of thought and released his picture as scheduled, and that was a win for AIP, as Norris's name was more bankable than Arkoff had anticipated. And by the time Fields' project, Citizen Band, later renamed Handle with Care, which was directed by Jonathan Demme, was released, the popularity of CB radios was already on the wane. And in fact, AIP's picture did better at the box office. Citizen's Band from Paramount only took in a disappointing $850,000 to Breaker Breaker's $300 million or so take. Breaker Breaker also beat the similarly themed Convoy and Smokey and the Bandit to theaters.
Director Don Hulette wrote the music for the 4 songs in the film's soundtrack with various lyricists. All the songs were sung by Denny Brooks.
And they all weren't very good. As per usual, we have several release dates for the movie, even in the United States. They didn't all come out at the same time, so April 1st, through May 6th. The movie was released in the United States. On May 15th, 1978, it was released in Germany, and it didn't make it to Denmark until December 19th, 1980.
Box Office Magazine told theater owners that the CB radio angle is the top ingredient, but don't overlook Chuck Norris, who was world karate champion 7 times from 1968 to 1974, retiring undefeated.
Sam Arkoff almost overlooked him. Taglines for Breaker Breaker include, "Don't muck around with an 18-wheeled trucker. He's got a CB radio and 100 friends who might just get mad."
A bean store dolly and a million miler. They had an 18-wheeler and a grudge.
Bean store dolly.
Is that what I said?
No, that's what it says, but it's so dumb. One man makes a difference.
A town without justice. A hero without fear.
Breaker Breaker, the battle cry of the great truckers' war.
The New York Times described Breaker Breaker as shoddy with wooden direction and a sophomoric cast. The Los Angeles Times called it a talky, melodramatic exploitation hybrid.
And similarly piling onto the movie, Box Office Magazine called it an inept actioner with doses of violence and comedy. The review gave Norris credit for his presence and ability to carry off the star assignment acceptably, but noticed that the bulk of the cast, with the exception of George Murdock, who played the judge, were non-actors playing caricatures. And as for director Don Hulette, the review gave him high marks for the action sequence, but dinged him for the dramatic portions of the film. The review also warned that the film uses less of the CB radio angle than the title would indicate, and that the ending promises more destruction than it delivers. Yet there is enough excitement throughout to compensate.
Really?
You weren't excited?
The movie earned $3 million or $12 million, depending upon who you ask. Chuck Norris has said that of all the films he's made, this one was his father's favorite.
I mean, that's your number one critic, so if Dad's happy, everyone should be happy. Breaker Breaker marks AIP's last martial arts theme movie because to Arkoff, the company's few karate action films like Deep Thrust all looked alike.
Breaker Breaker was referenced on an episode of Late Night with Conan O'Brien when O'Brien used a Breaker Breaker lever to showcase random scenes from Walker, Texas Ranger.
Breaker Breaker also got razzed in 2013 by the Riff Tracks gang, who called it one of Chuck Norris's finest mustache-less films.
According to the TV Tropes website, the film marks the first time Norris uses his trademark jump kick the bad guy through a window move.
And this may not be related at all, but there's a restaurant owned by the Grindhouse Killer Burger Company and located in Atlanta, Georgia that's called Breaker Breaker. Their menu has a trucker motif on it. Now, there's no indication that it's based on the film because their menu leads more towards fried fish sandwiches and not TV dinners.
Much of the cast of Breaker Breaker would never appear in another film, but there are a few actors who we would see in other AIP-related projects. George Murdock, who played Judge Trimmings, appeared as Fat Man in The Mac in 1973, which was originally released by Cinerama Releasing, but it would be re-released by AIP in 1978 on a double bill with Coffee.
Our arm wrestling pal, the great John L., also known as Kaminsky, would appear as the Boar Man in The Island of Dr. Moreau, which was also released in 1977.
One of the Truckers' CB voices, Ron Hallstrom, had earlier appeared uncredited as Surfer Kid on Sidewalk in The Born Losers in 1967.
And another CB voice, Donnie Williams, appeared as Highway Department Man in Truck Turner in 1974.
So, Cheryl, that's all we have on Breaker Breaker except for our personal reviews. So tell me, using our AIP scale, where A is awesome, I is intermediate, and P is pathetic, how you rate Breaker Breaker.
Well, before I give you the rating, I have to tell you something. Chuck Norris does not own a stove, oven, or microwave because revenge is a dish best served cold. That's a Chuck Norris joke. Those were all the rage a while back. But believe it or not, I'm not terribly familiar with Chuck Norris's body of work. I'm not one for kung fu movies, and I never watched a single episode of Walker, Texas Ranger. I basically know him from memes and those silly jokes that are about his alleged greatness. But as I am a big fan of bad movies, I think that might be an egregious oversight on my part. Because if the other movies starring Chuck Norris are this delightfully bad, I think I've been missing out. Because Breaker Breaker is so bad. Chuck Norris is an incredibly wooden actor in this film. And granted, it's his first leading role, but still, he doesn't have any presence here, assuming that he does in later projects. I don't really know. Many in the Breaker Breaker cast are acting rings around Norris, which is odd because most of them aren't even actors. And that, unfortunately, only serves to highlight Norris's painful, charisma-free performance. George Murdock is an absolute delight as the film's antagonist, the judge, a redneck villain with the soul of a poet. Sure, he's presiding over a town of corrupt cops and thieving scrappers, but he does it in the most entertaining way. I love his hillbilly Fraser Crane persona. And Jack Nance, who we already told you was Eraserhead in the David Lynch movie, is also fantastic in his limited role. I would have preferred to see more of his character and to have found out why he was friends with JD. JD is like a lone wolf, but somehow he has a great number of friends in the trucker community. It would be easier to believe that Burton would be the one with a large network of friends who'd be willing to destroy a town just because he asked them to. And even Pearl, the sassy truck stop waitress, exudes more personality than JD. Heck, I'd rather watch a movie about her. And then we're also tasked with believing that strong, independent Mama Arlene, who's had to deal with her dead husband's horrible father, who's menaced her for years, apparently is ready to finally pack up and leave the town for JD, whom she literally just met. And we never see how their great romance begins. They meet, and the next thing we know, he's telling her to pack up her things and her sons to run out of town with them. I guess Chuck Norris really is that good. He steals the heart of any character when he wants to. And Norris's lackluster performance only serves to make the film's many plot holes gape even wider, as he can't act his way around them in a way that would distract the viewer, being me. And those plot holes are like how the entire trucker community is aware of this town, which exists only to steal truckers' rigs and cargo and then injure, kidnap, or kill them. Well, why didn't that cavalcade of vigilante truckers come wreck the town earlier, before JD got in trouble there? I mean, Dottie's husband was paralyzed by Strode, the scummy sheriff. Nope, it's only when Dawes, who works alone yet has hundreds of friends, is about to be executed that all the 18-wheelers, all 5 of them, come rolling into town and utterly destroy it. I suppose it was well known that every man, woman, and child in that town deserved to be killed, or at least lose their homes, because of their association with the town. And that leads me to wonder why any trucker would be dumb enough to find themselves getting railroaded in Texas City. I mean, the Citizen Band radio connects them all, right? They should all have that information. Their corruption is so well known that every trucker is aware of how bad it is, but they don't do a great job of warning off all the other drivers who somehow end up in that very simple speed trap. JD knew what happened to Dottie's husband, but didn't feel like he had to mention the danger to his brother. So it's really not very believable. And that means that the point of the movie is not the trucker angle or the CB radio phenomenon. No, the point is the fights. And frankly, those aren't that good. It's the usual trope where there's one fighter against many, but those many approach him one at a time, which maybe in 1977 wasn't as tiresome as it is now. JD easily disarms anyone with a gun, knife, or other weapon, like a pitchfork. His kicks are so dangerous they can kill instantly, except when they don't, and they only wound the opponent. So I said before that I'm not a big fan of martial arts movies, but I do know they come better than this one. The end fight where JD kills Boles is just ridiculous. And for some reason, they do it in slow-mo, like we mentioned, even when Boles is yelling at JD, which only enhances the silliness. Even more bizarrely, there's the footage of the horse prancing around the enclosure where the 2 men are fighting. Is that supposed to be symbolic of something, like something sexual? Because the horse does seem like a fetish item for someone, maybe the director. And then the real letdown happens once Boles is dead. The movie's over. What about Strode? What about the judge? Are they still alive? Boles is only the minor functionary in the town. He's like Wade or George or Wilfred. He's not the big bad. Is JD unwilling to take on the real villains in the piece? Is it still on his to-do list? Was Don Hulette setting up a sequel? Well, we'll never know, sad to say. But all those quibbles aside, the movie's actually pretty enjoyable. There are some really fun little scenes, like the arm wrestling match at the truck stop, or the judge and his hand puppet playing Romeo and Juliet with the barmaid, or watching the semi-truck drive through a helicopter, setting it on fire, then getting to see the whole town flattened by the convoy. It shouldn't work, but somehow it does. Like the Chuck Norris joke says, the quickest way to a man's heart, or a woman's heart, is with Chuck Norris's fist. Despite everything, I really enjoyed Breaker Breaker. I might even willingly watch more Chuck Norris movies, or even an episode of Walker, Texas Ranger, if they're as good as this one. So for being just the right kind of bad, I'm going to give Breaker Breaker an A. What do you think, Jeff?
Well, going into this, I was a little ashamed to admit that I had never seen a Chuck Norris movie either. I'd seen The Way of the Dragon, but that doesn't really count. That's not a Chuck Norris movie. It's a Bruce Lee movie. But if Breaker Breaker is any indication of what I've been missing, I'm no longer ashamed. I've been watching a lot of exploitation films lately. Not that I've been particularly seeking them out. They've just kind of been rolling out in front of my eyeballs for some reason. And I think there are two types of films in the exploitation genre. The fun ones are the ones where the hicks are the heroes fighting against the system, and they have kind of a Robin Hood quality. And I guess I'm just paraphrasing the lyrics to the theme of Dukes of Hazzard now. The others are the ones where the hicks are the villains, usually inbred lunatics such as in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Deliverance. And Breaker Breaker actually falls into the latter category. But what Chainsaw and Deliverance didn't have was Chuck Norris as the protagonist. He's not yet Chuck Norris when this film was made. It wouldn't be for a few more years when he'd begin making movies for Canon Films that he'd become action star Chuck Norris, subject of future memes. So what we have to work with here is a blonde-haired, clean-shaven, not quite yet Chuck Norris in a Canadian tuxedo as a trucker looking for his missing brother. Okay, fine. Now let's talk about the residents of Texas City. They are basically one large family. They're all brothers, cousins, and sister wives. And they apparently had settled down in this old ghost town until they achieved a high enough population to be granted charter, and thus was founded the city of Texas City, California. So, not having any resources of their own, they lure unsuspecting truckers into town to steal their loads. And not just truckers, I guess, because somehow they managed to get a hold of at least 2 police cars and a helicopter and a car cruncher. So it appears they've been successful at this, and they've probably been using similar tactics for quite a while since before becoming chartered and recognized by the state of California. But with this, Trimmings is able to appoint himself as judge and probably Stokes as sheriff and Boles as deputy as well. I might be mistaken, but I doubt there was a formal election here. Not that it matters because the denizens of this town all share one brain. But their perceived stature as judge, sheriff, and deputy gives them more opportunity to waylay passersby into their town. Now, at some point, the character of Jack had made his way to Texas City, and whatever happened there left him paralyzed after a run-in with Stokes. The trucker community is aware of this, but they seem reluctant to discuss it. They only whisper about it, and one would instead expect them to be broadcasting it, or at the very least, it would be the topic of conversation at the truck stops. Because truckers are notorious conversationalists. They're always chattering with each other. That's why if you're stuck in traffic and there's a lane closure up ahead and you don't know which lane to get into, the best bet is to just follow the truckers because they're talking to each other and they know where to go. So maybe it's just that more experienced truckers wouldn't even fall for the ruse that gets both Jack and Billy to go off their main routes. So they don't bother discussing what happened in the first place because it just seems like a one-off occurrence. Even JD, who has himself just heard about what happened to Jack, doesn't bother to give his brother a heads up before sending him out on his first solo run. So for the sake of the story, we'll just say that's the case, that this just isn't worth mentioning it because only a real dummy would fall for it. So now that our characters and situation are in place, let's talk about the action. This is an action movie after all. There are a few explosions, which is always cool. A truck rolls down a hill and inexplicably blows up, something I always enjoy seeing in a film. And a few buildings explode and catch fire, as does a helicopter, as the truckers are ravaging the town. Nice. There are a few shots of people running to get out of the way of the trucks, and we don't recognize any of them as the villains. They just live in Texas City, and we've never seen them. But because they live in Texas City, they are inherently evil, so we don't care about them. And the truckers are able to destroy the town, seemingly without consequence. And they don't even seem to be concerned about any possible damage sustained to their own vehicles. But of course, this is a Chuck Norris movie, so we have to talk about the fight scenes. And they're not exciting, but at least they're quick. Chuck takes a beating until he decides to kick someone. He takes down Kaminsky with a couple of kicks, for which JD is barely within the frame. And with George, it's a tap to the chest from a weird angle, no less, since he's still trying to climb out of a car crusher. And that's enough to kill George. He kicks Boles through the wall of a barn, but that happens off camera. And the final fight between JD and Boles, which should have been between JD and Strode, since Strode was named as the villain at the beginning of the film, is all in slow motion and nothing much happens. The most exciting part is when Boles picks up a handful of sand and throws it in JD's face. It's really more interesting to watch the horse react to these jerks tussling in his pen. And then when JD turns to leave, but Boles has one final oral insult to hurl, which turns out to be a probable death sentence for Boles as JD delivers a seemingly fatal blow to Boles' chest. Then the horse jumps the fence and we fade to black. I think this is an interesting film, but what makes it interesting is the stuff that we don't see that we as viewers are just supposed to take for granted. I want to know where Wilfred got his helicopter, and how did he learn to fly it? Are they hijacking fuel trucks to supply their fuel station? Why do they have a general store when apparently all their ill-gotten goods are distributed amongst the population? As we said within the podcast, Tony Trimmings tells JD that Arney brought over a bunch of Shelley's frozen dinners, so he was distributing them to everybody in town. So what doesn't make the film interesting is all of the off-screen fighting. Can you imagine if a Godzilla movie did all of this fighting off-screen? All in all, I find this movie is a lot more fun to talk about than it is to watch. It works as an okay diversion, but it didn't do much more for me than that, and I'm going to give Breaker Breaker an I.
I still think we're both more generous than we should be.
So for now, I think it's time for the American International Podcast to pull off the highway.
That's a big 10-4, Jeff.
Until next time, I'm Jeff Markin.
And I'm Cheryl Lightfoot. And we'll catch you on the flip-flop.
And we'll meet you at the drive-in. Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.